Government's outright assault on persons of any faith, but particularly those it associated with foreigners, such as Christians and Muslims. I'm Dorjee, USAF's current chair, and only Tibetan Buddhists ever appointed to serve on the commission. USAF is an independent, bipartisan US federal government commission created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA. The commission monitors the universal right of freedom of religion or live abroad, using international standards to do so, and makes policy recommendations to Congress, the President, and Secretary of State. I'm honored to be joined at this hearing by two esteemed colleagues who also work on international religious freedom, Bob Fu of China Aid and Tom Far of the Religious Freedom Institute. I look forward to their testimonies. USAF began reporting on China in our very first annual report and has continued to do so every year since, because of that country's systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom. The State Department first designated China as country of particular concern, or CPC, in 1999, and has done so in every instance the department has made such designations, most recently in December 2017. And USAF has recommended the CPC designation for China every single year. Regrettably, the conditions of USAF first reported in China nearly 2 decades ago have not improved. In fact, the conditions have worsened under President Xi Jinping due to the Sinicization and securitization of religion. Religions must accord with communist ideology, and religious freedom is most severely restricted in the name of national security. USAF has consistently raised these two pertinent issues at various hearings and events. Relatedly, USAF's 2018 annual report depicted ongoing repression and discrimination directed at Tibetan Buddhists, Uyghur Muslims, Protestants, Catholics, and Falun Gong practitioners. These abuses include destruction and dismantling of houses of worship and religious symbols, forced eviction from and demolition of religious education institutions, restrictions related to the practice and the study of one's faith, on language, culture, attire, parents' ability to name and teach their children, religious rituals and ceremonies, and freedom of movement. Imprisonment of religious leaders and followers, as well as lawyers and human rights defenders advocating for religious freedom. Prolonged disappearances and arbitrary detention without trial, denials of legal representation and medical care, and intimidation and physical assault, sometimes through torture, to force believers to renounce their faith. Forced attendance or even unlawful detention at re-education in indoctrination facilities, and pressure to join state-sanctioned religious organizations. The scope and scale of this violation is staggering. Perhaps the best way to convey China's horrific religious freedom conditions is by highlighting the human element, such as the Chinese prisoners that are part of USAF's Religious Prisoners of Conscience project. Through that project, USAF commissioners advocate on behalf of specific individuals imprisoned for their faith background for religious activity. In China, commissioners are advocating for 3 such prisoners. Panchen Lama. In Rinpoche Nyima, the Panchen Lama holds the second highest position in Tibetan Buddhism. He is one of the world's longest held prisoners of conscience. Chinese government authorities kidnapped the then 6-year-old boy and his family on May 18, 1995. They have not been heard since. Just days before Ginjin's abduction, His Holiness Dalai Lama chose him to be the 11th Panchen Lama. The Chinese government, in complete disregard for the Tibetan people, named his own Panchen Lama, though most Tibetan Buddhists reject his selection. The Panchen Lama's disappearance and detention is in the context of the Chinese government's ongoing vilification of the Dalai Lama, its asserted control over the reincarnation system of Tibetan Buddhism that includes the Dalai Lama's reincarnation, the destruction of important Buddhist sites at Lalung Gar and Yachin Gar, the pervasive security presence throughout Tibet area, including inside monasteries, nunneries, and the imprisonment of countless Tibetans like language advocate Tashi Wangchu, whose appeal of his 5-year prison sentence was denied just this August. China's repression is so extreme that at least 153 Tibetans have self-immolated since February 2009 in support of religious freedom, human rights, and the return of the Dalai Lama to Tibet. Guru Mira Yemen. On July 1, 2009, Guru Mira Yemen, a Uyghur Muslim, participated in a demonstration following the deaths of Uyghur migrant workers. Authorities accused her of helping organize the demonstration, in part by posting information about it online. A court sentenced Ms. Yemen to life in prison on charges of splitism, leaking state secrets, and organizing illegal demonstrations. Our only crime was defending our fellow Uyghur Muslims. When we think of a war on religion, Beijing's overt criminalization of Islam certainly comes to mind. The government prevents Uyghur Muslims from observing Ramadan, invades their private everyday lives with pervasive security measures, prohibits children from attending mosques, and bans the Uyghurs' language instruction in schools. Worst of all, the Chinese government is detaining approximately 1 million Uyghur Muslims in unlawful detention camps, allegedly to provide vocational training to prevent extremism. Imagine the entire city of San Jose, California, a population of just 1 million people detained against their will. And the Chinese government is not just punishing those currently detained. Authorities harass and intimidate their loved ones, truly separating families, and have inflicted severe trauma on generations of Uyghurs impacted by gross ill treatment, torture, shame, just because they are Muslim. Hu Xijin. In August 2016, a Chinese court found underground church leader and religious freedom advocate Hu Xijin guilty of subversion and sentenced him to 7.5 years in prison and another 5 years deprivation of political rights. He was one of nearly 300 lawyers and activists arrested, detained, or disappeared as part of a nationwide crackdown that began on July 9, 2015, also known as the 709 crackdown. The already poor situation for Christians, like other religious groups, has markedly declined since new religious regulations came into effect on February 1st this year. Just days prior to regulations, Chinese police used dynamite to annihilate the evangelical Golden Lampstand Church. More recently, authorities shut down Zion Church, one of Beijing's largest unregistered Protestant house churches. Across several provinces, authorities have confiscated Bibles, demolished churches, moved or destroyed crosses or other religious symbols, sometimes replacing them with the Chinese flag, and arrested countless Christians. In an unprecedented display of frustration, hundreds of underground house church leaders and clergy have signed a statement calling out the Chinese government's abuse of power and violations against religious freedom. Each of these individuals are prisoners adopted by USERV's commissioners through our Religious Prisoners of Conscience project, but sadly, they represent only a small fraction of the thousands wrongly imprisoned in China, many because of their faith. I'm proud to advocate for both Benjamin Lama and Gulmar Gimen, and my colleague Commissioner Gary Bauer is advocating on behalf of Hu Xijin. I would like to make some recommendations. It would be easy to think that there's little hope from such big assessment. However, there are a number of steps the US government can and should take to underscore religious freedom concerns in China. First, the State Department must immediately redesignate China as a CBC, country of particular concern, for its systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom. Under the framework of International Religious Freedom Act, CBC designation should have been made by the end of August, and the USERV urges the State Department to make them as soon as possible. Second, in addition to appropriate sanctions available under PERFA subsequent to a CBC designation, the administration should pursue targeted sanctions against specific Chinese officials and agencies under the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. Third, the State Department and entire administration should build upon the momentum of the historic ministerial advance religious freedom and continue their bilateral and multilateral efforts to shine a light on religious freedom concerns in China, such as in the ministerial statement on China. Fourth, the administration and members of Congress should pursue regular visits to areas in China deeply impacted by the government's religious freedom abuses and raise religious freedom concerns, including cases of prisoners of conscience, whenever they interact with Chinese government counterparts. The House of Representatives just passed the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act. The Senate should pass the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act that would deny entry into the United States for Chinese government officials responsible for creating or administrating restrictions on US government officials, journalists, tourists, and others seeking to travel to Tibetan areas. I'm a Tibetan American, and I would definitely like to go to see Tibet, so I don't have that chance right now. Moreover, the US Congress should more actively seek readouts from administration officials about the interactions with China, in particular to inquire about discussions related to religious freedom. So in conclusion, I would say that religious freedom is called a universal right for a reason. It belongs to everyone, everywhere. Everyone has the right to have a faith or no faith at all. and no one has the right to control it for others. When the Chinese government attacks freedom of religion or belief in a wholesale and brutal manner, it's incumbent upon us all to hold them to account, not just because they have violated the norms and standards of rule-based international order, but because in doing so, Beijing has assailed humanity with this blatant disregard for the human conscience. Thank you again for holding our hearing on such a timely and important subject.
Dr. Dorjee, thank you very, very much for your leadership and for that tremendous statement to the committee. Let me just begin with some questions.
Government,
you and so many others were there. I wonder if you could just give us your thoughts as to the follow-up. How well do you think the momentum that was created at that ministerial has been acted upon, especially as it relates to China? Why have few countries signed the statement on China? Is it out of fear of retaliation, in your view, or some other reason? And you did call, obviously, for looking at sanctions. One of the concerns we've all had for years is that the Tiananmen Square sanctions have been used in a double-hatting fashion when it comes to CPC, putting curbs on police equipment. And I've argued for years, a new set of very specific sanctions needs to be imposed on China to let them know that we're not kidding. And in the past, we've even had to fight the State Department when they wanted to double hat the ambassador at large himself or herself, and give somebody else the portfolio. In addition to that, you'll be the ambassador at large for religious freedom, which we very vigorously push back on. But on the sanctions front, that is what we do. If you could speak to that, I would appreciate it. Marco Rubio and I chaired a hearing just a few weeks ago, a little longer than that, about a month, and we focused on the Uyghurs and a number of aspects of the people being rounded up, put into about 1 million strong, maybe more, into concentration camps, re-education camps. And we raised strongly, and Ambassador Kelly Curry, who's our ambassador to the Economic and Social Council at the United Nations, gave very chilling testimony about the problem of surveillance. That the surveillance state has gone from looking for speeding like we have here, those kinds of, that's not surveillance state, that's perhaps even good law enforcement, arguably. But there, it's everywhere. And as he put it, this is his words, thousands of surveillance cameras, including in mosques, facial recognition software, obligatory content monitoring apps on smartphones, and GPS devices on cars, widespread new police outposts with tens of thousands of newly hired police, and even party personnel embedded in people's homes, and compulsory collection of vast biometric databases on ethnic and religious minorities throughout the region, including DNA and blood samples, 3D photos, iris scans, and voice prints, and it goes on from there. An intrusive state the likes of we've never seen, I don't think. Back in 2006, I began a series of hearings on how Google, Microsoft, Cisco, and others were enabling the surveillance state to monitor the internet, to find out where people were, who they were talking to, and that continues unabated to this day. But now, doubling down, they're doing even more, and obviously the technology here is being used elsewhere, but it can be used even more aggressively elsewhere as well. If you could speak to that, I mean, if ever there was a need for a sanctions regime that is truly, and one of the things that came out in our last hearing was all of the American companies, European companies that are just going along and selling them all of that equipment, which is being used to persecute, to torture, and to kill.
Thank you for the opportunity to answer your questions. So the Ministry to Advance this freedom was a very historic one, and because it was held for the first time, we believe that it was fruitful to a certain extent, and there were some positive outcomes that we observed. For example, that the like-minded countries able to organize maybe religious events in the coming months. And a number of countries have expressed their interest to create positions for international religious freedom ambassadors in their governments. For example, Mongolia, Taiwan, possibly Bahrain and Poland. So the United States, here we have been fortunate to be highly active and engaged in the Earth Roundtable supporting these efforts. So USEF has also engaged with a number of country delegations that already have or are seeking to create their own religious freedom roundtables. In Bangkok last month, USEF engaged with country delegations from Vietnam, Burma, Indonesia, Malaysia at the 4th Annual Southeast Asia Freedom of Religion of Belief Conference. USEF looks forward to staying engaged with these stakeholders as well as existing partners like the International Panel of Parliamentarians for the Freedom of Religion of Belief. So USEF looks forward to having a more active role in planning the process for the next ministerial. The Commission was proud to host 2 events that were part of the official program this July, including a 20th anniversary of Hartford Reception and U.S. government grant workshop, and applause efforts of NGOs in hosting so many successful side events during the ministerial. With regards to why few countries signed on a statement in China, my understanding is that participating countries had very limited time to review the language before the deadline to sign on, and also very few, if any, had authority to sign it without consulting back the home governments, so it is probably the matter of the first time and short time that might have happened.
Is it still open if somebody wanted to sign it today?
I believe so, but I'm not sure exactly what the language is.
Because I think if it is, an effort should be made to gather it.
I would assume it would be, right? So that we're welcoming, but a number of countries signed, we should acknowledge them, like Canada, United States, and United Kingdom, and Kosovo, and we hope more will sign to that. So with regard to double heading, the issues, use of, in our recommendation to the State Department, for the CBC designations, so 10 countries, have been designated as CBC countries, out of which 6 have been subject to double, head sanction or pre-existing sanctions. That includes China as well, and 4 have the waivers, if you will. And the administration, successive administrations have relied on this approach, while the statute permits that USEF has long expressed concern that using pre-existing sanctions or indefinite waivers provides little incentive for the CBC designated government to reduce or hold egregious religious freedom violations. So we would rather encourage the State Department for targeted sanctions, especially based on religious freedom violations. Such sanctions must be followed, CBC designation must be followed by implementing a clear, direct, and unique presidential action. So USEF also recommends that current and future administrations and Congress need to recommit themselves to the full and robust application of mechanisms available under the International Religious Freedom Act, just as you pointed that all the tools available must be used effectively.
So it's time to sanction in your view?
Yes, it is, I think, very much time to sanction. Targeted sanctions, I must say. You also raised the issue about the Uyghur, about a million Uyghurs in detention, and so the surveillance, of every movement, and they used the most up-to-date technology they could buy from the American companies or wherever they could, to track down everything and there's so much of a social control of movements, basically of Chinese back in their own country. And so that's such a serious matter. I think American companies, if they're involved in such trade, of course we're not saying don't do the trade, yes, you need to make your profits, but we must also keep in mind human concerns and humanity at heart. And so what are the implications of selling this technology to China when they put it to wrong use? And not only, I think, in the East Turkestan or with the Uyghur Muslims, they have been doing the same thing back in Tibet. Where in the monasteries, they have put all kinds of surveillance, and now basically the Chinese government, they appoint administrators in the monasteries so that they can, I should say, plan out everything and control everything. So such a serious matters that I think the Congress and the President, all of us, should look at. And we also mentioned about how like the Microsoft enabled that, and I think our company really have to. We also have human and social responsibility besides making money. So if you only think about the trade, that's what enables China to be bold and do the actually egregious things, violent with that they're doing. So we really have to put a check on that, and I very much agree with your mindset.
Without objection, a letter by Marco Rubio and I to Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, calling for bans, curbs on the export of those devices and that capability. Without objection, being a part of the record. I'd like to hear from Mr. Slauson.
So, Dr. Dorjee, thank you so much for your testimony. We really appreciate it very much. Looking at your biography, I see that you're very much an expert on Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism. And I look at the population of China of 1.38 billion people. And I looked at the different populations of the different religions of religious Buddhists, Chinese Buddhists, 185 million to 250 million. Christians, Protestants, 60 to 80 million. Catholics, 12 million. Muslims, 21 to 23 million. Falun Gong, 7 to 20 million. And 6 to 8 million Tibetan Buddhists. Why is it that China sees the Tibetan Buddhists being such a tremendous threat to them? Why do they have to have such control over the Tibetan Buddhists? And why would they imprison the sect? How did you refer to this boy? Well, he's not a boy now.
Benji Lama.
Benji
Lama.
Benji Lama.
Yeah.
So he's the successor. Is he?
He's the second highest, leader in Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah.
Very important, for recognizing for example, the reincarnation of the next Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
So yes, it's very important.
But why is that seen as being such a threat to China?
China claims to have 55 national minorities, and Tibetans are counted among those 55. But my understanding is that Uyghur Muslims, and especially Tibetan Buddhists, are very distinctive in terms of their history, language, culture.